Google Privacy Sandbox, it addresses some of the things that SKAN doesn't today. It's almost like if you could mash the two of those solutions up together, it'd be a pretty viable long-term solution, because Google's kind of solved for the front end audience targeting piece of the pie, and then Apple's solved for the measurement piece of the pie.
How do demand-side platforms change in the privacy era? Hello and welcome to Growth Masterminds. My name is John Koetsier. Back in the dim mists of time, like 3 years ago, DSPs were pretty straightforward businesses, right? By which I mean they were horrifically complicated, incredibly challenging, but at a conceptual level, it was relatively simple. We have a massive demand for ad placements. We match it up with devices whose IDFAs or GAIDs indicate compatibility or interest or opportunity. Since SKAN network, however, and soon Privacy Sandbox, it's gotten more difficult. There's less data, there's less history, there are more challenges finding great supply for a DSP's demand. So how do DSPs evolve in the era of privacy? To chat about this, we're joined with longtime adtech and martech expert. She's been with Equifax, with Epsilon. She's now head of product marketing at InMobi, Sara Camden. Welcome, Sara.
Thank you. It's great to be here, John.
It's great to have you. Like I said in our pre-chat, I feel like I've seen your name everywhere. I've heard your name in lots of places. This is the first time face to face. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. It's a fun subject to talk about, right?
Absolutely. Everything in ad tech is fun. Super fun. Barrel of laughs. Let's start here.
Of course.
Level set. What the heck does a DSP do?
Yeah. So DSPs are really there to make lives easier for marketers and ad buyers, and really kind of automate that process. I actually got my start in ad tech right around the birth of DSPs, when really, contextual type of targeting was still sort of the primary mechanism. But marketers realized with all of these devices that people had, they would love to get more granular and individually target people. So hence the birth of DSPs, that can take that data and really personalize as well as measure campaigns at that individual level, which we all have loved. Obviously, things have changed quite a bit, and it's a little bit of everything old is new again in the current state of DSPs today.
Back to the future or back to the past, one of those two. Let's talk about a DSP under SKAN network. How's that work? What are you doing? What signals are you using? How are you finding the right placements?
Yeah, that's a great question. Those individual identifiers that we all have become reliant on are a thing of the past now. So it's really looking at privacy safe type of signals that have to do with the user's device, some temporal things like the time of day or the day of week, the type of supply that you're targeting, be it the ad exchange, a specific publisher, or the type of publisher from a contextual standpoint. So is it sports? Is it news? Is it gaming? All of those signals kind of have to come together, and we have to do a lot more with a lot less.
Interesting. Are there some geo signals as well, roughly?
Yeah, there are some rough geo signals, like DMA, or just regional type things. Those are things that we tend to use, at least at InMobi.
Interesting. So that's a massive change. What kind of level of impairment? Let's just talk SKAN 3 right now, maybe, because that's what's dominant right there. What kind of level of impairment have you seen since losing the IDFA? What, can you estimate a percentage of efficiency loss in targeting?
Yeah. I don't know that I have an efficiency loss statistic off the top of my head, but one of the big things is just that loss of real-time feedback loop. SKAN has a couple of different timing mechanisms that delay, when marketers get that insight into their campaign performance, both from the conversion window standpoint, but then also this randomized delay that Apple applies on top of that, just to make sure that you can't triangulate who an individual user is, which kind of goes against the whole spirit of why SKAN exists today. So, that certainly has been a gap that, most folks are addressing through various predictive models to try to pinpoint, when a specific conversion event occurred, and what that event was in some cases, because, you have to overcome these privacy restrictions. before you even get insight into what exactly that user did from a conversion event standpoint.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So now we're moving into Scan 4. There's more
Hmm.
data available. You've got fine conversion values, not just coarse conversion values. You've got 3 postbacks, so you have a little bit of longevity over time. There's a bunch of
Hmm.
other things going on. How's that transition going? Where are we in that transition?
Yeah, yeah, that transition is a welcomed one from our perspective. As you mentioned, we get more data more often. It's also much more predictable. I think anyone who's been experienced with SKAN has probably cursed the pesky delay or the conversion window that kept resetting every 24 hours when a new event occurred. So now we have these 3 fixed windows of the first 48 hours post install, then days 3 to 7, and then days 8 to 35. And each of those comes with a postback versus just a single postback before. So, you do get that view into more of the consumer's lifetime value
Mm-hmm.
post install, which is incredibly valuable. And as far as an uptake perspective, I've been noticing a lot of attention coming from advertisers that had completely been averse to SKAN in the past. Either they were using mechanisms like probabilistic attribution, or maybe even diverting their budgets away from iOS entirely. They seem to have turned a corner and are now actually wanting to embrace SKAN, both the earlier versions as well as SKAN 4. And the publishers are coming alongside as well. SKAN 4 officially rolled out into the wild this past October, and by the end of 2022, we were seeing sub 5% of bid requests that were iOS as SKAN 4 compatible. But now, coming into April, we're up to 20%. So, there is supply out there to bid on. And really, the biggest impediment at this point is just getting the advertisers to come along and update their conversion value models to align with the SKAN 4 standards.
Wow, that is news to me. I had not heard that it's at 20% right now. That's obviously nowhere near where it needs to be for like full adoption or anything like that, but that's not insignificant. That's not insignificant at all. That means that there's widespread testing. There's the
Mm-hmm.
beginning of widespread adoption. That is really interesting, and it'll be super interesting to see how that pace accelerates or continues to grow over time. One thing that's
Absolutely.
interesting, I wonder, go ahead.
Oh, no, that's okay. I was just confirming.
Yeah, one thing that's interesting to me is obviously in Scan 3, if you didn't have a sufficient number of installs, you hit privacy constraints and you just didn't get data, right?
Right.
Uh, do you feel in Scan 4 that bar is lower, at least for getting course postbacks
Yeah.
for your first postback?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Early results that we're seeing is that now you get some level of conversion insights at around 5 installs per day per campaign, whereas it was about 15 in the earlier version. So, that certainly is a market improvement over the earlier iterations.
That is really interesting. And of course, marketers want everything. They want the fine conversion value. They want the source identifier. They want all the data you can possibly get when you, let's
Absolutely.
say, beat or exceed crowd anonymity numbers in Scan 4.
Hmm.
But getting at least some data, even at very low levels, is a huge improvement because getting those blanks in Scan 3, I think, contributed to what you talked about. Those marketers that said, I'm opting out. I'm out of here. I'm not
Yeah.
dealing with this Scan business at all because they got null values, or else they got values that were insane, $100 for CPI or $500 for CPI because so much of their campaigns didn't meet the privacy requirements. That's really good news.
Yeah, yeah, I would completely agree. And it really opens up iOS again to some of the smaller budget advertisers because, those privacy limitations in earlier versions would just preclude them from being able to spend enough to get over the privacy threshold and actually get some insights into their conversions.
Of course, we're in multiple transitions right now, right? We're going scan 3 to scan 4, and we've talked a
Mm-hmm.
little bit about how that's going. We know Privacy Sandbox is happening, and we see, every month or two, Google releases a little piece of information, a little thing here, a little thing there. We
Mm-hmm.
anticipate, I think the promise was GAID would be end of life, end of this year. Who
Mm-hmm.
knows? We've seen that the third party cookie has received new leases on life quite frequently from Google. What's your sense of Privacy Sandbox and when marketers need to really start paying attention to that?
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned how cookies, the can keeps getting kicked down the road when it comes to deprecating third-party cookies. I've not been seeing that same friction when it comes to the mobile identifiers. I think because they've gotten that practice with iOS and app tracking transparency that, they're more prepared for that. So I'm not seeing the type of delays that we've seen with cookie deprecation. So honestly, by the end of this year, I think marketers need to be ready to predominantly be targeting their campaigns and doing attribution without relying on IDs.
That is super interesting and kind of freaky because I had sort of back of my mind, and I wonder maybe a good chunk of marketers, we tend to be optimistic people, right? It'll be
Mm-hmm.
more time, we'll have more opportunity. I kind of figured, Google will kick the can down the road, 3 months, 6 months, something like that. Who knows? We'll see where it goes. And I think many
Mm-hmm.
marketers have been thinking similar in similar ways and therefore not really getting ready. Also, because guess what? They're busy with the Scan 4 transition, which is not easy in and of itself. But you bring up a good point. That hasn't moved since Google announced it maybe a year ago, something
Mm-hmm.
like that. And also, there's the iOS precedent, right? So Apple gave some warning, but when it happened, IDFA was out. I mean, it wasn't out. I mean, it's possible to get, but it's really, really hard to get, and you get a small fraction. Maybe with
Mm-hmm.
the extensive warning that Google gave, they're like, hey, that is it. It's gone. It's done. I'm not sure if the industry is ready for that yet.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree. I mean, marketers are pretty instant gratification minded, and if there's workarounds, you can't blame them for taking advantage. But the way that we try to advise our customers is, by all means, like make hay while the sun is shining, but do not ignore, the looming clouds on the horizon, because you could be caught flat-footed and you're going to be in a lot of trouble. So right now is the time to really be testing and learning and gathering a repository of data on how to make your campaigns perform without IDs, because you're going to be at a big competitive disadvantage when those band-aids get pulled off, whether it be Apple enforcing their policies that ban fingerprinting or the eventual rollout of Android Privacy Sandbox.
Mm-hmm. As a DSP, when you look forward and see Privacy Sandbox or Android, are
Mm-hmm.
you how do you feel about it? Are you like, well, there's a lot of data there. There's more data than even at scan 4 level.
Mm-hmm.
Are you cautiously optimistic, or are you thinking, wow, no GAID, we're screwed?
Yeah, I'm definitely optimistic. Part of why I came to InMobi, like I was very happy at my last job, but I loved sort of their forward-looking vision and preparing for that world without identifiers, and going all in on that from a strategy standpoint. So yeah, I'm actually very optimistic based on the results that we've been seeing with earlier versions of SKAN, where we've been able to get KPIs costs at parity with ID based traffic and fingerprinting campaigns. So I'm very optimistic about it. And Google Privacy Sandbox, it addresses some of the things that SKAN doesn't today. It's almost like if you could mash the two of those solutions up together, it'd be a pretty viable long term solution, because Google's kind of solved for the front end audience targeting piece of the pie, and then Apple's solved for the measurement piece of the pie. So, putting those two things together, I think is a pretty reasonable solution.
Well, that'd be interesting. Easy solution. Put Apple and Google in a
Yeah,
room and force them to
right?
figure it
They love
out.
to work together, right?
Best friends, obviously.
Hmm.
Well,
Frenemies.
yes, it is interesting. There's some speculation that, obviously the industry has been pushing for stuff in from Scan 3 that we're sort of seeing in Scan 4, but there's some speculation that Privacy Sandbox has impacted what Apple has put in SKAN network version 4, and
Hmm.
that evolution will continue over time, very likely, as each massive mobile player sees what the other is doing and says, okay, we can add this or we can add that. It's a little
Hmm.
different in Google's perspective because Google is an ad network. That's how they make 97.9% of their money. That's not an official stat.
Hmm.
Don't quote me on that. But it's somewhere
It's
around
close
there.
enough. It's
Where
close enough.
exactly. Whereas Apple, it has an ad network, but I mean it's a rounding error on their profit.
Yep.
So interesting times ahead. And you mentioned already, marketers need to prepare, be ready
Hmm.
for a future without ad IDs. Talk about how DSPs will help marketers win in this era.
Yeah, I mean, DSPs as well as, MMPs, I think are great consultative partners on this, particularly those that have been investing in this idealist future for a while, because there's a lot of them that haven't. But, in the case of InMobi, like we've started very aggressively investing in, staffing up to support SKAN and really building it into our roadmap. Back when app tracking transparency was first announced, we started running idealist campaigns. So we've got sort of this repository of learnings that goes into all of our bidding models that are ID free. So finding those DSP media partners that have the experience that can help them along that journey, as well as leaning on their MMPs for how they should adapt their reporting strategies and attribution strategies to support this idealist future. I think is the key to helping make that jump.
Excellent. Sarah, thank you for taking this time.
My pleasure. It was a great chat.